Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. How many of you have heard me before, or this is your first time? How many of you are here right now? All right, good. What I want to do is start with something that is going to set the tone for what we're going to talk about here today. A friend of mine went to a college near Seattle. This is 4 or 5 years ago, and he interviewed students. And I want to get your impression of this particular interview. It's about 4 minutes long. It's from the Washington Family Policy Council or Institute. We'll need sound on this, ladies and gentlemen.
Men and women anymore. We went to Seattle University to find out.
Aware of the conversation going on in Washington State right now around kind of gender identity, gender expression issues, and the ability to access facilities on those grounds?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's gender neutral bathrooms in all the dorms and stuff like that.
I think that gender is fluid, so if you want to use a bathroom because that's a place and that's a space where you feel comfortable and safe in doing so, then I think that that's completely fine.
I think that if whoever you think you are, if you're male or female, then that's the bathroom you should go into.
I think if it doesn't really negatively affect anybody, then I think anyone should be able to choose what gender they choose to identify as.
People, no matter what their gender identification is, they should be allowed to use whatever restrooms they feel like they identify with.
Is there a difference in your mind between men and women?
No, yes. I mean,
possibly.
In general, yes. But I don't know why I think that.
Socially, currently, yes, there is. There is no need for that difference to exist, scientifically and logically.
If you think that you're a male, if you think that you're a female, that matters more than the biological difference.
There's not much difference besides what society forces onto people.
And how do you know the difference between men and women?
By what people think they are. So you can't judge someone just on their looks.
I don't think there's any one way to really distinguish between a man or a woman, and I don't think it's necessary.
It's not always consistent. It has a high probability, 98% of the time I can get it right. There is some ambiguity.
I think, there are ways to tell, but then again, you can always be wrong.
What would you say I am?
Just judging off of your looks, I would say that you're a male.
I would probably assume a man, but then you never know.
A male.
Why would you say that?
Based on how I look at you.
Do you think that's a problem?
Yeah, probably.
Do you think the difference between men and women matters for any reason?
No, not really.
I think most sociologists agree that the concept of gender is more of a societal construct.
I do think it matters somewhat, yeah.
To me, no. I don't feel as if it matters to me because at the end of the day, the person is just a person.
no. I don't think it should matter.
And the differences on a social level are simply a product of a biased society.
Then is there a reason to have those labels, male or female?
I don't think so. I think that it's, again, a social construct of this binary that we're given at birth.
There is kind of a difference, but at the same time, if someone wants to identify as one or both or as nothing, I also find that completely okay. And
There may be nothing more self-evident in the natural universe than the fact that every animal species is divided into two halves, male and female. Yet the most intelligent of those species seems to be wrestling with whether male or female are actually real things. Have we discovered something new, or have we become too clever for our own good?
Sometimes when I call a lady sir by accident, they get very offended.
Well, I don't like to quote Nazis very often, but one Nazi propagandist had it right. He said, if you repeat a lie often enough, people will believe it, and you will come to believe it yourself. What do you think of that? You think the state of our culture is in good shape? That was 5 years ago. It's gotten worse since then. By the way, before we move on, can we just point out that transgenderism presupposes fixed genders? Because if I'm a man and I think I'm a woman, I have to have some idea what a man is and some idea what a woman is to know the difference. I also have to have some idea what a man is and some idea what a woman is to make the so-called transition. So transgenderism on one hand presupposes fixed genders. On the other, it tries to say gender is completely fluid. You can't have it both ways. But do you see what we're up against? This is not going to be your typical talk on why we should do apologetics. I'm not going to go through a whole series of verses that explain why we ought to do it. I think it's pretty self-evident that we have to do it. Otherwise, people are going to continue to do one thing. And I'll explain what that one thing is in a minute. But let's start with the verse that we all have known if we are apologists, and that comes from Peter, who says this: always ready to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have, but do this with gentleness and respect. Now, the gentleness and respect thing is hard for me because I'm originally from New Jersey, all right? But we're supposed to give evidence for what we believe. If we don't give evidence for what we believe, why shouldn't you just believe in woke ideology? Or why shouldn't you be an atheist or a Buddhist or a Muslim or a New Ager, or just make up your own worldview, as many people seem to do now? We have to give evidence. I want to mention one other passage that is not often quoted as a reason to do apologetics. But let me ask you this. When John the Baptist was in prison, and he sent an emissary to Jesus because John the Baptist was worried or didn't know if Jesus truly was the Messiah. And he said to the emissary, ask Jesus, are you truly the Messiah or should we wait for someone else? Do you remember what Jesus said? He told the emissary to tell John the Baptist to stop doubting and just have faith. No, he didn't say that. What did he say? Here's what he said. He said, go back and report to John what you have seen and heard. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the good news is proclaimed to the poor. Blessed is anyone who does not stumble on account of me. Notice that Jesus is an evidentialist. He says, look at the evidence. You want to know if I'm the Messiah? The blind can see, the lame walk. In other words, Jesus is saying the evidence will show you who I am. You don't just have blind faith. You give evidence that Jesus is the Messiah, that Jesus is the one who can save us. Now, if we don't give evidence, do you know what people are going to do? They're going to do what the culture tells them to do. And you know what the culture tells them to do? The culture says, follow your heart. That's what the culture says. Follow your heart. Now, is this really a good idea? What I want to talk about for the rest of our time is what we're up against with regard to the culture and why following your heart is not a good idea. In fact, let's go back into ancient history for just a minute. There's only 3 paths you can take to find hope and identity. And our culture is trying to find hope and identity. The 3 ways is you can look out to other people, you can look into yourself, or you can look up to God. And in the ancient world, ancient culture said you looked out to other people. You followed your family. If your father was a potter, you were a potter. If your father was a blacksmith, you were a blacksmith. If you were a woman, you took care of the home. That's just the way things were. That's ancient culture. Modern culture says, no, you don't do any of that. You follow your heart. You find out what's on your heart, and you follow it at all costs. You cross every stream. You swim every ocean. You climb every mountain. Is that a Disney movie? Or is that Sound of Music? It's one of those, right? And you don't let anyone tell you you can't do that. So you got to look in for that. You got to figure out what's really on your heart. Now, religious culture says you follow the rules. You look up and you follow the rules. Actually, Christianity is none of these. I'll explain why at the end. But let's look at the one that dominates our culture now, that is having kids on a college campus unable to admit that there are men and women. And that is following your heart. And here's why they can't seem to get this right. Modern culture says that if you have some sort of idea or desire on your heart, that idea or desire is you. That's your identity. They're one and the same. And so this is why if you were to say, well, natural law and the scriptures say that same-sex behavior is against nature and is wrong, they don't think you're just talking about behavior. They think you're talking about them because that's their identity. The problem is this is even infecting the church because in America today, it's much more about me-ology than theology, right? Whatever I want, that's what I'm going to believe. Well, look, if you open up the Bible and you're trying to get your own word out of there, what's the point? You're not there to get your word, you're there to get God's word, right? Isn't that the point? Who's your source of authority? Is it you or is it someone beyond you? The truth of the matter is we have to show people that their thoughts are not them. What you believe isn't necessarily you. Your identity is not what you think about. Your identity is not what you think about. If it was, most men would be women and most women would be chocolate. Right? Okay, so what about this idea of following your heart? Here are 3 reasons why following your heart is not a good idea. The first is our hearts are deceitful and selfish. The second is our hearts are often conflicting. So which heart do you follow? And the third is our hearts are always changing, if you haven't noticed. So you might make a rash decision to follow your heart on Monday. By Tuesday, you're on to something else. Is that the right way to live? Is that a stable way to live? Is that a consistent way to live? Is that a healthy way to live? We'll look at it. Let's start at the heart is deceitful and selfish. In fact, to show you why our hearts are deceitful and selfish, let's say before you came over here today, you went into the bathroom and you're getting ready to come over and you look into the mirror, and as you look into the mirror, you see a sign is attached to your head, and it transmits every single thought you have in big LED letters. You can't turn the sign off. You can't cover it. No matter where you go, everyone is going to see every thought you have. Would you be sitting here right now if that sign were attached to your head? No. You wouldn't leave your bathroom, would you? Why? Because our hearts are evil. Our hearts are selfish. We have evil thoughts repeatedly. Why is that? Because we're bent toward evil. Our nature's bent toward evil since Adam. It's easy to be bad. It's hard to be good. By the way, this is why you can't remember names. No extra charge for this. But when you meet somebody for the first time, you go, hi, how you doing? You're not thinking about the name. The name's gone. You're going, that is the ugliest shirt I've ever seen. Where'd you get that haircut? Walmart? I mean, you're thinking about other things, right? Because your hearts are evil. You're evaluating whether or not you even want to know this person beyond the introduction. Can this person do anything for me? That's what you're thinking. Admit it. So our hearts are deceitful and selfish. In fact, this is, of course, what the scriptures say. Jeremiah puts it very well. He says, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. Who can understand it? In fact, even the Babylon Bee has discovered how evil the human heart is. Check this out. Recent study finds 100% of men would eat any fruit given to them by a naked woman. You think you would do better than Adam? No, you wouldn't. You'd do the same thing, wouldn't you? Of course you would. And to show you how deceitful our hearts are, there are 3 things that can pull us off track very easily. In fact, some of you may know my friend J. Warner Wallace, the cold case homicide detective. He's been here before. He's been here at Calvary Chapel, Tucson. Well, Jim has been on Dateline more than any other cold case homicide detective because he's really good at solving murders decades old. And Jim says, by the way, he's got a website called coldcasechristianity.com. You may want to avail yourselves of that. There's a book by the same name and several other great books. Anyway, Jim says whenever he finds a body that he knows has been murdered, he says, I know there's only 3 reasons why that guy's dead. I don't have to track down 100 reasons or 1,000 motivations. This guy's dead for one or more of these 3 reasons. There was either a sex issue, a money issue, or a power issue. Sex, money, or power. When you think about it, those are the 3 reasons why people will murder. In fact, those are the same 3 reasons why any of us will do evil, will sin. Why? Because sex, money, and power are good things. The problem is they're so good, we'll often take shortcuts to get them. And isn't it interesting? The Apostle John lays this out perfectly in 1 John chapter 2 when he says this, do not love the world nor the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the boastful pride of life is not from the Father, but it is from the world. The world is passing away, and also its lusts. But the one who does the will of God lives forever. Sex, money, and power are the 3 things that can trip any of us up. So if you're just blindly following your heart, and your heart is motivated by sex, money, and power, where's that going to take you? To bad places, ultimately, unless you can control your impulses. You know, most psychologists and sociologists will tell you that one of the keys to success is impulse control. Being able to delay gratification. And if you blindly follow your heart, you're not delaying gratification, you're feeding gratification. In fact, I think this is the second most important verse in the Bible right now for our culture, the one I'm about to put up here. The first, of course, has to do with the gospel, but if I had to pick one verse that our culture needs to understand, it's this, and it comes from the Old Testament. Solomon says, above all else, guard your heart because everything you do flows from it. Above all else, guard your heart because everything you do flows from it. Doesn't say follow your heart. If you follow your heart without moral restraint, you're going to wind up addicted, broke, alone, and probably prematurely dead. You need to guard your heart. And we need to show people the way to truth is through Jesus, not by following your heart. And how do you do that? You give them evidence that Christianity is true. Now, earlier last year, my son and I wrote a book that even shows that Hollywood gets this. You know, there's a lot of garbage that comes out of Hollywood. We all know that. But do you know that their most successful films actually are stolen from the greatest story ever told? The greatest story ever told, the story of Jesus. And many of the life principles that you find in some of these films are taken directly from the Bible, whether the producers of these films know it or not. Let me just give you one example. Here, who in here has seen Iron Man? You seen any of the Iron Man films? Tony Stark, brilliantly played by Robert Downey Jr. Well, you know, Tony Stark has everything you'd think you'd want to be happy, right? He's got sex, money, and power. He's got it all, but he's spiritually dead. In fact, Robert Downey Jr. said, this character is spiritually dead. He has no purpose. And after he sells arms to a terrorist group, one of his own weapons blows up near him, and it puts shrapnel in his chest. And he has to have a device installed in his chest to guard his heart from encroaching shrapnel. If that particular device fails, he dies. Now, I don't know if they intended this or not, but for me, that's a beautiful picture of Proverbs 4:23. You need to guard your heart because everything you do flows from it. Then, if you follow the rest of the films, in the beginning, you think this guy can't be a hero. He's not a hero at all. It's all about him, sex, money, and power. But then he goes through this long arc of character development to when he gets to Endgame, spoiler alert, and he's going up against Thanos. Tony Stark is the one that sacrifices himself to save the universe from the evil Thanos. Now, he didn't follow his heart. He did the opposite. He followed the truth. He sacrificed himself. Now, can you imagine if at the end of Endgame, Tony Stark came to the point where he's about to go up against Thanos, and he looks at his buddies and he goes, guys, I'm just not feeling it today. I don't want to take on Thanos. I got to get back to following my heart and taking care of just me. I'm out. And then the film ended. Would anyone go, wow, that's inspiring? No, that's not inspiring at all. He turned tail and ran. He didn't follow the truth. He followed his heart. But you know what inspires? Not following your heart. What inspires is following the truth right to sacrifice. And that's what Jesus did. He didn't want to go to the cross. What does he say to his Father in the garden? If there's any other way, Lord. But if there isn't any way, not my will, but your will. So the first reason we can't follow our hearts is our hearts are deceitful and selfish. The second reason is that our hearts are conflicting. I mean, you want to be healthy, but you also want that donut, don't you? I mean, think about how often we are conflicted over certain things. We want to be healthy, but we want to eat whatever we want. We see that shiny new thing we'd like to buy, but we'd like to be financially responsible. We want to get married and have a family, but we still want to play the field, right? We want to have kids, but we don't want the responsibility. Which heart are you going to follow? At some point, you got to make a call. And you got to say, I'm either going this way or I'm going this way. Your heart may be divided. So which heart are you going to follow? You got to make a choice. Because it's not crystal clear which way you want to go. I don't know about you. I mean, I got married at 24. And after I got married, marriage put a big damper on my dating life. Did it do the same for you? And I still saw women that I found attractive. Oh, well, I already made the decision, right? You can't follow your heart without moral restraint. It's a disaster. You got to make a call. One way or the other. And C.S. Lewis put it so brilliantly. He said this, surrender to all our desires obviously leads to impotence, disease, jealousies, lies, concealment, and everything that is the reverse of health, good humor, and frankness. For any happiness, even in this world, quite a lot of restraint is going to be necessary. You have to restrain yourself. As unpopular as that is, that's the only true way to ultimate success in life. And it's the only true way you're ultimately going to be saved, because you've got to, if you say yes to Jesus, you've got to say no to a lot of other things. Jesus said you're going to have to deny yourself. You're going to have to take up your cross to follow me. Yes, we're saved by grace, but it's a complete commitment. So which heart are you going to follow? In fact, one pastor, John Mark Comer, put it this way, giving in to the desires of our flesh does not lead us to freedom and life as many people assume, but instead to slavery and, in the worst case scenario, addiction, which is a kind of prolonged suicide by pleasure. You ever think about that? Is anyone in here, don't raise your hand, but if you've been a victim of addiction or you know somebody who is, it's prolonged suicide by pleasure. Are those people free or are those people in bondage? Yeah, they're in bondage. So let's say this all together because I want you to walk away with this again. You ready? Above all else, guard your heart because everything you do flows from it. The third reason that we can't just follow our heart without moral restraint is that our hearts are changing. They're changing continuously. About 10 years ago, about 1 of every 10,000 men were afflicted with something known as gender dysphoria. That's where they thought they were women, but they're really men. Over the past decade, there's been more than a 4,000% increase of young girls claiming that they are men, that they are trans. What could possibly be causing this incredible explosion of transgenderism? What is it? You have it in your hand, some of you right now. It's a social media contagion. That's where this comes from. It's almost completely driven by social media. Look, when you're a young person, what do you want more than anything? You want to fit in. You want to be in with your friends. And there's a certain point where you want to stick it to your parents too, don't you? What is the easiest way in today's culture to feel in and to get applause? Go online and tell everyone you're trans. Everyone is going to applaud you, and anyone that says that's dangerous, don't do it, is going to be shouted down or canceled. This is almost completely social media driven. I'm not denying that there are people out there that truly have gender dysphoria, but when you have this 4,000% or more explosion coinciding with the social media explosion, you realize that this is driven almost completely by the iPhone or the Droid or wherever you're getting your social media information. So what are we going to do to help people with this? By the way, do you know that 80% of young people that claim a trans identification grow out of it by the time they're 18? They say, no, I'm back to my biological self. Yet, and I'm just going to tell you the truth here, don't shoot the messenger, on March 31st, 2022, President Biden came out and talked on Trans Visibility Day about how brave everyone is for affirming transgenderism. And if you have gender dysphoria, you're so brave. He also put out a memo from the HHS, Health and Human Services Department within his administration, that talked about how gender-affirming care needs to be advanced throughout America. He also said that if you're a parent and you have a child who thinks he or she is the other gender, you need to affirm them in that gender. And if you don't, the government will consider taking that child away from you. I'm not making this up. In other words, the United States government, if you have a 3-year-old boy who thinks he's a girl and you don't affirm him in that, if they find out, they may just come take that child from you to transition that child. Oh, we can't get involved in politics. Really? Are you still going to say that as they knock on your door to take your child from you? We need some people with courage in this country. Because if the Chinese government came to your door and told your pregnant wife that she had to abort her second child, would you say, oh, that's just fine? I hope not. Now they want to come take our kids from us because we're not politically correct enough for them. You know who's been making a lot of sense lately? And most Christians 20 years ago would have not liked this man at all. In fact, 20 years ago, I was on his program a couple of times. Do you remember who Bill Maher is? He had a program called Correct, Not Politically Correct. Now he's on HBO. Bill Maher is a true liberal, meaning he's for free speech. He's an atheist, but he's for free speech. And he's been coming out lately going, all this leftist stuff going on in our culture is insane. In fact, last May, he had a segment called Along for the Pride, where he pointed out how only 0.8% of the silent generation claimed to be LGBTQ, and 2.6% of baby boomers, and then 4.2% of Generation X, and it kept going. He said, if this trend continues, we'll all be gay by 2060. What's he pointing out? He's pointing out that this is a social media contagion. In fact, he said, look, If kids knew what they wanted to be when they were 8 years old, the world would be filled with cowboys and princesses. And he said, when I was a kid, I wanted to be a pirate. Thank God nobody took me seriously and took me for eye removal and peg leg surgery. He's an atheist, and he's saying this. Why aren't you? How come he's standing for the truth and you're not? Sorry to scold you guys, but I'm really frustrated with Christianity. We're a bunch of sissies. We're too comfortable. We're afraid somebody's going to unlike us or cancel us. Thomas Sowell put it well. I don't even think Thomas Sowell's a Christian. I don't know. Maybe he is. He's 92 years old, but he's got more wisdom than any 10 Christians I know. Here's what he said. Ours may become the first civilization destroyed not by the power of our enemies, but by the ignorance of our teachers and the dangerous nonsense they are teaching our children. In an age of artificial intelligence, they are creating artificial stupidity. Now, what is the counter to this? Evidence. Apologetics. Let's say it again. Above all else, guard your heart because everything you do flows from it. Now you might ask the question, well, how do we guard our hearts? First of all, in order to know how to direct yourself, you've got to know what the purpose of life is, right? If you don't know what the purpose of life is, how do you know which way to go? What is the purpose of life? This is the interactive portion of the program. Why are we here? I hear give God glory. Okay, where does it say that? And what does that even mean? I hear Christians say, we're here to give God glory. What does that mean? I mean, really? Can we stop being so pompous? What does it mean to give God glory? And where does it say that? Where does it say give God glory? That's why. Make Jesus famous. I hear that. Actually, I think Jesus told us what the purpose of life is. In his high priestly prayer, when he's praying to the Father, in John 17, he's praying about us. And here's what he says. Now this is eternal life, that they, meaning us, may know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ whom you've sent. The purpose of life is to know God, not just intellectually, but also personally, and then to make him known, if you add the Great Commission to this. That's why we're here, to know God and to make him known. Do you know that if you follow your heart without moral restraint, it's going to take you away from God? Paul says in Romans 1, if you suppress the truth long enough, particularly on the sexual issues, to go your own way, God is going to give you up to a futile mind to the point where not only are you doing evil, you're cheering on other people who are doing evil. How we behave even sexually will determine how well we become acquainted with God. So the question is, how do we guard our hearts? I said earlier that the idea that what's on your mind is you is normally not true, but there is one exception to that. What is the one exception? Christianity. Why? Because if you know God for who he is, then when God looks at you, because you've accepted the sacrifice that his son provided, he doesn't see you anymore. He sees Jesus. That's your identity. You know, in our culture, our identity is something that we think we have to achieve. We achieve our identity. The problem is, if you have to achieve your identity, first of all, there's always somebody that can do it better. And number two, when you can no longer do whatever you think your identity is, does that mean you no longer have an identity? I mean, if you put your identity in your job, what happens when you lose your job? You no longer have an identity? You put your identity in your finances. What happens when the stock market crashes and you lose all your money? You no longer have an identity. You put your identity in another person. What happens when that person leaves you or dies? You no longer have an identity. You put your identity in your sexual orientation or your sexual preference. What happens when you can no longer sexually perform? You no longer have an identity? Or when you're no longer sexually preferred? Do you realize none of these things are ultimate? You were not meant to put your identity in temporal things. In fact, Sam Alberry, who is a same-sex attracted Christian speaker who has chosen to be celibate, says never put your identity in any aspect of your sin nature. You are not here to achieve your identity. You are here to receive your identity. And in Christianity, it's simple. You simply repent of what you've done and you accept what Christ has done. In fact, an eyewitness of Jesus who traveled with him probably all 3 years and then wrote a biography we call the Gospel of John, said this in the very first chapter. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become a child of God. Your identity is waiting for you. You receive it. You don't achieve it. You simply accept it. And you can never lose it. You realize you can lose everything else in life? You can lose your money. You can lose your job. You can lose your spouse. You can lose your kids. You can ultimately going to lose your life. The one thing you can't lose is Jesus. It's eternal. He created you to know him and then to make him known. So how are we going to love people? How are we going to love the young girl that claims she's trans? Do you know what our culture thinks? Our culture thinks love means approval. Does love mean approval? How many parents do we have in here? All right, how many former children do we have in here? Okay, good. That's all of us. Ladies and gentlemen, if your parents approved of everything you wanted to do as a child, were your parents loving? No, your parents can't approve of everything you want to do as a child. That wouldn't be loving. They'd be unloving. You need to stand in the way of evil if you're going to love somebody. And in the passage that everybody reads at their wedding, but nobody obeys. 1 Corinthians 13. Here's what Paul says about love. Love always protects. Love rejoices in the truth. Love always perseveres. If you want to love people, you have to tell them the truth along with grace because you love them. Jesus says, I give you just one new command. What was the one new command Jesus gave? Love one another as I have loved you. How did he love us? He sacrificed himself for us. Do you know what we do when we tell people what they want to hear rather than what they need to hear? We're sacrificing them for ourselves. Why do we tell people what they want to hear? So they don't get mad at us, so we don't get any blowback. So we're sacrificing them to save ourselves. When we tell people what they need to hear, even if they're going to be mad at us, we're sacrificing ourselves to love them. That's what we need to do. Again, Thomas Sowell put it very well. He said, when you want to help people, you tell them the truth. When you want to help yourself, you tell them what they want to hear. Are you going to continue to enable people in your life under the false definition of love? Or are you going to truly love them and take any of their consternation because you love them? My first pastor said this, I think it was very wise. He would tell his kids, there's nothing you can do that will make me stop loving you. But that doesn't mean I'm going to approve of everything you do. If I did, I wouldn't be loving you. In fact, if love required approval, Jesus could never love us. Because he doesn't approve of much of what we do. But he loves us because he is love. So, What do we need to do? We always need to be ready to give an answer. We got to give a reason if we're going to counter what we see in the culture today. If we're going to truly love people, we need to do this. And that's why Pastor Robert and his entire team here are putting this conference on. And I know there are many, in fact, how many pastors do we have in here? Yeah, look around the room. Pastors, you're there on the front lines. You have to teach your kids how to truly love people, your congregations how to truly love people. I brought some resources that can help you do this, and I want to point out, by the way, all the proceeds from the sale of the books and the DVDs will go to feed needy children. Mine, okay? Just so you know. First of all, I want to send you this PowerPoint presentation and about 5 or 6 other ones. All you need to do is text this word evidence to this phone number. Text evidence to 855-909-0582, 855-909-0582. I'm going to send you this PowerPoint presentation, including the entire I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist PowerPoint presentation, which is 360 slides. It's in a PDF format, so you can look at it on your phone if you want. We did bring I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. It's out there. There's a 12-part DVD series that goes with that. A lot of homeschoolers use that, or even Sunday schools or small groups. Christian schools use it as a curriculum. You can get some workbooks from our website on that. We have Stealing from God, Why Atheists Need God to Make Their Case. I've noticed that when atheists are arguing there is no God, they're actually stealing aspects of reality that would only exist if God existed to say he doesn't exist. So they have to actually assume God in order to argue against him. And then I mentioned the Hollywood Heroes book. That's back there as well. All right. So can we finally agree that above all else, guard your heart because everything you do flows from it?